biscuits and tea.
As a foundation, what happens when I smoke weed?
Okay, well, when someone smokes or eats, when someone consumes weed in any form, you usually, the part of weed that is responsible for getting you high is THC. So that's a molecule that the cannabis plant makes. When THC floods your brain, it sticks into these proteins called cannabinoid receptors. And in the easiest way of explaining it, basically what that does is that might mess up how two brain cells talk to each other, essentially. So you kind of do that across the entire brain, and that will just shift the way that you perceive things. It'll change some of your behaviors. It just kind of slightly tweaks the way that the brain processes information and produces behavioral output for the most part.
How does that difference from alcohol with what that does with your brain?
Alcohol is not really specific in the sense that basically what alcohol does is it interacts with all kind of there are neurotransmitters in our brain that excite cells or quiet cells down, and alcohol basically amplifies the chemical signals that make our cells calm down. So it's what we call a central nervous system depressant, because what it does is it kind of quiets down everything in the brain. Now, the reason why alcohol changes behavior is parts of your brain like the frontal cortex, which is like the part of our brain that, when you see someone do a dick move and you're like, you're an asshole, but you stop yourself from saying it. That's your frontal cortex. And when you get drunk, that basically stops working properly. So all that stuff that you would normally inhibit, you just kind of let it out. It's why the joke is that alcohol reveals who people are, because it kind of takes down that guard you put up about how you build your persona by quieting down the frontal cortex. The cannabinoid system doesn't really do that. It kind of just tweaks the way that cells talk to each other. So the way they work is very different. And this, if you compare this to something like cocaine or amphetamine, which are stimulants, they kind of do the opposite. They drive a lot of neural activity and create a state of hyperactivity. So there really isn't a lot of, there's kind of classes of drugs that work the same, but most drugs really affect the brain very, very differently from one another.
Is it just quick question? Because I've heard also with like opioids, like there's opioid receptors. So does that kind of work the same way as THC?
Yeah, actually, they're very similar. Opiates, the big difference that you see with opiates from cannabinoids is opiate receptors also exist in your brainstem where you regulate breathing and heart rate. And when they get activated, they quiet that down. That's why people overdose and die from opiates for the most common reasons, because they stop breathing and their heart stops. There's no cannabinoid receptors in that part of your brain. So that's why people can consume an insane amount of cannabis and have a horrible experience, but it won't kill them the same way that opiates would kill you.